It's Johnny's birthday, it's Johnny's birthday, and we would like to wish him all the very best.
In this special Gear Club episode, we celebrate the post-Beatle life of John Lennon. After the Beatles broke up, John and Yoko moved to New York, where John produced, recorded, and played songs that spoke to the post-60s generation as they struggled for justice and an end to war. To mark the occasion of his birth, we've collected first-hand accounts from the people who worked most closely with John. First up is Shelly Yakus, who recorded many of John's albums at the record plant in New York City.
What were the Lennon sessions like?
They were unbelievable.
Really?
I remember driving into the session and hearing All You Need Is Love on the radio. And I tried really hard to not bother John with how did you guys do this stuff and what did you...
God.
You know, he was inundated with that stuff, you know.
Right.
But I said, hey, John, I heard All You Need Is Love. Those horns and strings, you know, the ba-da-da-da-da, right? Are those horns and strings that Mellotron you guys had? And he goes, no, mate, it's the fucking London Philharmonic. He said, no, it's a whole orchestra. What are you thinking? You know.
Next up is Jack Douglas, who worked extensively with John and Yoko, most notably producing Double Fantasy.
And I've been asked this, like, who was the easiest artist I've ever produced? It was him. The thing was that when I got to do Double Fantasy John was very insecure at that point. No one knew we were making that record for a month. When I was rehearsing the musicians, what I had done was I charted all of the songs he sent me on a cassette from Bermuda. And my first reaction when I heard the cassette, he asked me, he called me up, he said, what do you think of these songs? He didn't like them at all. A good number of them were for Ringo's album. And when he asked me what I thought, and they were very primitive demos, done on a boombox, he asked me what I thought, and my first reaction was, I can't do any better, to tell you the truth. I think you should just release these. They're incredible. I mean, yeah, they were primitive, but it was a whole other, and he just laughed at me. He said, no, we're going in the studio to do this for real. I said, okay. But I almost got myself out of a gig, which was a pretty good one. You know, and I miss him, and I truly believe that it would be a different world if he were here with us.
Yeah.
Rod O'Brien was on staff at the record plant during the years Lennon frequented the studio.
John walks in, John and Yoko walk in with May Pang. Okay, May was their assistant at the time. I went to college with May.
Wow.
I knew her in college, and she used to say to us all the time, I'm going to go work for the Beatles. And we're like, sure you are. None of us believed it. And then she got a job at, who was there? Alan Klein's office.
Okay, gotcha.
The publishing. That's where she met John and Yoko. She walks in, and she immediately goes, oh my God, Rod, John, Yoko, I went to school with him, and she's like giving me this big thing. So now I'm really nervous, right? Now she's building it up like I'm like the be all and I'm better than Roy. You know, this is my buddy from school, and I'm like. But 5 minutes after he was in the room, it's like he was just like this, and you know, Jack can tell you. I mean, too. It was just like hanging out.
While Ed Stasium never worked directly with Lennon, he has an amazing and heartwarming story about the birth of his son and meeting the Beatle. Take it away, Ed.
So I go to the hospital. Chip and Albert go into MCA. They get to meet John. I think I called into the station. There was a quick labor. Boom, it was done. I called in. There was a hotline that I had the number for, and spoke to the guys and said, Debbie had a boy. Name is Jason. And so Albert and Chip approached John and told him the story that I was supposed to come in and, meet him, but, my son was being born. So John grabs a yellow legal pad and writes, "Happy birthday, Jason. With love, John Lennon." And a little caricature of him and Yoko in the bottom corner. And then Yoko scribbled something that it's undecipherable. I don't know what it is, but they gave it to me. There were some pictures taken with John, my friend Chip. in the studio while John's on the phone. And I got a picture from Chip and had a little plaque made that said, presented to Jason Breyer Stasium on the day of his birth.
Jay Messina recorded John and Yoko many times over the years, and he shares his recollections of Lennon as a producer, remixing Double Fantasy, and the night of his tragic death.
So the night that John was the tragic night, he had come from the record plant. Is that right?
Yeah, he was in the mix room, and the thing that was bizarre about it is Jack and I was supposed to start a record, a whole album, in Studio C when he finished with John. So I was in Studio C setting up, and then Jack came in a little bit later and said, somebody just shot John. And I said, John who? You know, because he'd be the last person you would think anybody would want to shoot, you know. And I was just, you know, shocked like everybody else.
Yeah. So you were in the building when he left?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was in C. Yeah, and I remember the next night, Jack was on Tom Snyder, and he was still pale. He was still looking frazzled.
How did you get through the night last night, young man?
I didn't get through the night, really. After returning from the hospital, I went for a walk all the way down to Grand Central Station. I live uptown, and I hung around Grand Central Station for a while and tried to make sense out of a completely senseless act as best I could, because I had just left him at 10:30, and we were feeling really up. We were meeting again at 10 o'clock in the morning to continue our work. And after it happened, I heard about 20 minutes later. Usually, because I only live 2 blocks from John, I ride uptown with them every night in the limo. But I had another session after that one. And I was in my session. I was told that John had been shot. And we just immediately went to Roosevelt Hospital. And of course, it wasn't long after that we realized he was dead. And I spent the rest of the night in the streets trying to communicate with him in some way.
Greg Calbi mastered several of John's records and spent countless hours around Lennon at the record plant. Greg talks about what John was like in and around the studio and the prank he and John played on Roy Cicala, the owner of the record plant.
The good story that I have, the fun story that I have about him is when we worked together on the rock and roll album, was that I had dropped a reel of tape, an old jazz tape. It was on a pancake, so it didn't have the reel, and it really wasn't wound tight. So I just picked it up, and it just went bloop. So it was one of our clients, Mainstream Records was one of the clients up there. And there was no, we were just holding it. There was no order yet, but I had to basically fix it. So when I was cutting a side or whatever, I sit by hand and try to get it onto a reel, slow, but boom, 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 over and over. I was about maybe 10% of the way through it. And it was in a box in the room. And John looked at the box when he came in, and he looked at it. He says, "What the hell is that?" And I explained the situation. So he looked at me and he said, "Is there any way that we can make it look like that's my tape?" And I thought for a second. I said, "Actually, it's pretty easy. I just take a splice apart and I'll attach it to the reels on the machine, and it'll look like it flew off the machine." He said, "Oh, that's perfect." So he gets on the phone with Roy and he starts screaming, "What a jerk I am. Who's this fucking kid? He doesn't know shit. Get up here. This is ridiculous. I just lost really, but whatever he said." And about a millisecond later, the door opens and Roy, white as a ghost. I had never seen him look like this, totally white. And he goes over to the machine and he's trying, it's like completely trying to put 2 and 2 together. And he says, don't worry, we can fix it. Don't worry. And then either John or I did that first, and we both cracked up. And then Roy just turned and he said, "I'm going to get you guys." And John was so happy. He said, "I got you. So it was a great memory of,
Yikes.
To cap off this birthday celebration, our hosts John and Stuart share their brushes with Lennon on the streets of New York and at his apartment in the Dakota.
But it was a weird thing, and I don't remember why, but my parents were actually driving in Manhattan to come get me for some reason. So they picked me up at the record plant. I said, "Hey, I've got to go to the Dakota, blah, 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 to drop something more for Yoko Ono." And they were like, "Okay." So my dad drove me basically, like, 21-year-old kid, walk into Dakota, checkpoint. They let me in. I went up to her apartment, knocked on the door. She opens the door, and I'm like, hey, this is from Jack. He told me to give you this cassette, blah, 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 And she was very nice. She said to me, maybe you can help me. Our stereo isn't working right, and maybe you could help me figure it out for me. And I was like, okay. And I went in there, and I started fiddling around, and I had no idea, like, how to I didn't know. I wasn't really a tech or anything. And I spent like 5 minutes, like, just messing around with cables and doing stuff, and she was just hanging around. And I finally said to her, I'm really sorry, Yoko, I'm not, like, qualified to fix. I just don't know. I'm not a tech. I mean, if you want, we can get one of the record plant tech guys. Maybe he'll come over and help. And she was, like, very nice. She said, thank you. And I said, okay, I'm sorry. And I left. But, I got to spend, like, 15 minutes in their apartment.
Wow.
And it was mind-blowing.
So my little John Lennon moment was probably about 1980. I had a shrink on the Upper West Side on 96th Street. And I came back one night. I used to go to work, and then I'd go to the shrink after work. And it was a beautiful fall October night. But in the morning, before I went to the shrink, I put on my WNEW, right, buddy? Listening to a little Scotto or Vince Scelsa or whoever.
Right.
And they mentioned that it was John Lennon's birthday. And I went, oh, cool. That's nice, As you know, he was a New Yorker of sorts. He was part of our fabric. We loved that. We took it for granted in a way, but he was a New Yorker.
Wasn't that the year he passed away?
It might have been a couple of months before. It was October. It was his birthday.
Yeah.
I think he passed away in December.
December.
Right?
He was murdered in December.
Right. And I remember I walked down from 96th in Central Park. I cut in. It was a beautiful night. I said, fuck it, I'm going to walk down to the Village. I walked down, cut across Central Park. I'm down on 72nd Street going south on Columbus, and I see a dude. You remember how you would hop the meters, the parking meters?
Yeah, of course.
Right? I see a guy do that and come off the other side and sort of stumble, like almost fall. And he gets back up and turns around, not to me, but it was John Lennon.
Oh, my God.
And it was Yoko, and it was another guy. And I'm thinking, for some reason, I thought it was Bob Gruen, the photographer.
Yeah, of course.
But it was the three of them, and they kind of had a laugh that John sort of tripped. But he did that move. They walked on, and I had my moment of, do I go and say hi and happy birthday or not? And I walked behind them for a couple of blocks, and I was too nervous to go up and say anything.
For extras from the episodes, like playlists, links, and videos, head over to gearclubpodcast.com. Sign up for the newsletter, and come say hi and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Gear Club Podcast. Thanks for listening.
And please, if you like what you hear, let us know and leave a review.